The plight of migrants in Libya. Amnesty International says women and girls face the added danger of rape, sexual violence, and exploitation on the treacherous journey to Europe. Who is responsible for their suffering? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle Carey. It's a part of war and conflict that is sometimes underreported. Sexual violence against women and girls. Underreported because survivors are often forced to suffer in silence, not feeling safe enough to report their trauma. Now, Amnesty International has documented the experiences of women fleeing conflict looking for a better life. Migrants making a journey fraught with danger, crossing from Libya to Europe. Amnesty found that women were among the most vulnerable of the many trying to reach Europe, exposed to violence and exploitation. Amnesty says women traveling alone or without a male partner were most at risk of rape or sexual abuse. Women were sometimes abducted by smugglers and forced to have sex before being released, or were forced to have sex if they didn't have enough money to pay for their journey. Now, before we bring in our guests for this inside story, Hoda Abdelhamid reports from Misrata in Libya on the difficult and dangerous journeys often taken.
They didn't know each other before, and now they're living together. This is the only space available for women at the detention center in Misrata. Outside, hundreds of men are roaming the corridor. The days are long. There's nothing much for them to do other than think about their lives.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's not.
17-year-old Sadia set off from Mogadishu with her younger sister.
I decided to leave because I'm a young lady. I need education. I need everything. And they killed my father. I don't know where my mother is. Then I had to leave to look better life at least.
To get this far, the women have crossed several borders, often without any travel document and little money. Their last leg were through the Sahara Desert in southern Libya. Most of them hidden in the back of a truck, like this one, often hidden under bales of hay. Some were robbed, others raped. Exhaustion is etched on some faces. This woman traveled with her 2 children from Niger. She just arrived here, but won't talk to us. It's 16-year-old Aisha who explains what they've been through.
We don't eat anything 2 weeks, 3 weeks, only water, not food. That's difficult, and they beat us sometimes. They think we are animals, we're not people.
The women here have different reasons for their ordeals. For Ayam, it's about getting an education and feeling safe.
I want to study and be a doctor, but it won't come true. I'm 15 and I don't know the alphabet. Where should I stay? There's no place for me in this world. Wherever I go, there's war. I always think time is going by and I still haven't gone to school. Now I'm in prison.
These women don't know exactly where they are in Libya, but perhaps the most difficult part is not knowing for how long they will be held in this room. Many complain they haven't been able to speak to their families for days, sometimes weeks. They worry no one knows where they are.
All maybe it's like me, we need to go. Every people is here have problem.
Okay.
Every people have child, they live with a long child. Every people have problem. We need just to go.
The uncertainty Bashar and the migrant women here face is enormous, but they are resilient. So despite everything, they will continue to wander, looking for safety wherever it may be. Hoda Abdelhamid, Al Jazeera, Misrata.
And let's go to our guests now. Joining me in London, Magda Mughrabi, Libya researcher for Amnesty International and author of that report. In Washington, D.C., Soraya Chemaly, writer and media critic whose work is focused on sexualized violence. And joining us via Skype from Nicosia in Cyprus is Anna Zobnina, chair of the European Network of Migrant Women. I appreciate you joining me. I want to start by reading part of this Amnesty report, and it reads this way. Women, particularly those traveling alone or without men, are at serious risk of rape or sexual abuse by smugglers and criminal gangs. Women abducted along the smuggling route who are unable to pay the ransom or at times coerced into sex in exchange for being released are being allowed to continue their journey. Ms. Mughrabi, I want to start with you. You have spoken to women who have lived this experience. What do they say to you?
Yes, women, basically the women and men that are traveling across the borders from sub-Saharan Africa, but also from countries in the Middle East, such as Syria, that are trying to find a safe place in Europe, have said that very often upon crossing the border in the desert, into Libya, they can be at times held in groups. Their convoys can be held captive by the smugglers themselves. So women, it's exactly that whenever they're not accompanied by men, or in fact when the men that are traveling with them are considered to be weak, then they are exploited and in some cases raped by the smugglers. In some cases, they are coerced into having sex with the smugglers themselves. The smugglers tell them, well, you know, if you come with me, if you sleep with me, then you won't have to pay the additional fee in order to take me to, in order for me to take you to the coast and then help you embark on a boat. They are amongst those that are trafficked and handed over to organized criminal groups. So they can be held in houses, unfinished houses, which are, you know, a kind of secret detention facility, usually outside of cities, for weeks or months on end. In some cases, we've had men, especially, that were held for as long as 6 months in these houses. There are obviously no female guards. There are only male guards, and they can face beatings there, or forced to witness beatings in order to coerce them and their families to pay a ransom. So once they are released,
no, carry on.
Once they are released, they can, you know, they work usually as domestic workers for Libyan families, where again they face labor exploitation, where very often they're not paid the wages as agreed, where they're not allowed to talk to their families or leave the house. And then, you know, when they eventually leave, in some cases also their employers can, if they want to escape from paying the salary or avoid paying the salary, they can hand them over to immigration detention centers where they will again face torture and other forms of ill treatment, including women that are pregnant. I mean, we've documented cases where pregnant women were also beaten, where again in those immigration detention centers, it's a problem across all prisons, you know, even Libyan women. There is a lack of female guards, of female police officers. You have to bear in mind that Libya
Ms. Mughrabi,
at the moment.
If I could stop you for just a moment, because we are going to pick up on exactly that point, but I wanted to bring in Ms. Chemaly now. Just, Ms. Chemaly, can you make it very clear for us the distinction between smuggling and trafficking, which clearly are dangerous both, but they're not quite the same thing?
So they're both criminal enterprises, right? And I think that there's an idea that smuggling, this act of moving people or products across a border, right? That's different from trafficking people in a way that they themselves become the labor, the forced labor, and the product. And so I think those are elided in these situations. And for the people being smuggled and being trafficked, there are no borders between those two things, right? If you look at the Mexican border and the U.S.-Mexican border, there's actually a term that means body as currency in Spanish, right? And it's cuerpo mático. And I think that what we're seeing here is what we see in other similar situations, where sex becomes a currency, where people's forced labor becomes the only way that they can survive. And for women and for girls, and for boy children too, that happens to be rape, right? It happens to be sex, survival sex, like in Haiti, for example. There's a lot of survival sex tied to food. But that is a spectrum. From smuggling to trafficking, it's a spectrum of violence and forced labor. Ms.
Zobnina,
answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Ms. Zobnina, I saw you nodding as Ms. Chemaly was talking. Did you want to get in on the point she was making?
Yeah, I just totally agree with what she was saying with regards to the interrelationship between the smuggling and trafficking, that it is a kind of a wide spectrum, and you have the intention of exploitation on the one hand, on the one side, that makes it a trafficking, and then more or less the immediate desire to gain profit that has to do more with smuggling. But and the major point that was raised is how the currency, how sex and sexual female body and sexual body of a migrant woman who might be trafficked or smuggled, or she's migrating on her own terms, becomes a currency. In Europe, there is a very clear tendency for this.
Ms. Chemaly, I know research is a lot of what you do. How do we arrive at accurate numbers for just how prevalent these crimes against women and girls are? Because they go underreported, often because governments also don't want the public to know what's happening. How do we arrive at accurate numbers?
I think accurate numbers are really elusive. One of the major issues we face is shame, right? These women are penalized for being victimized in these ways, and they're penalized socially, culturally, within their families, by the government. And so there is no real recourse for them. Reporting these crimes is not an option in many situations. They are facing sexualized violence in their homes, in their neighborhoods, in their countries, at the point of origin. They're facing it through transit, and very often they're facing it in detention, or they are actually raped by officials who are supposed to be protecting them. So I think that it's all but impossible. I mean, the numbers that we have are all suppressed numbers, and they're horribly high. So we can only really estimate the real scope of the problem globally.
Ms. Mughrabi, I want you to pick up, if you can, on a point that Ms. Chemaly was just talking about, some of the reasons that women and girls find themselves taking these dangerous journeys. What are some of the factors that cause this, and what role does culture play in it?
Right. I mean, what I wanted to start by saying first is that, you know, very often these abuses against women are taking place in situations where women face discrimination in law and in practice. So, for instance, across North Africa, in this case in Libya, Libyan women are as well facing discrimination, where it's very hard for them to seek redress for in cases of domestic violence, in cases of rape or sexual abuse. So it's things that we do not hear about even from Libyan women themselves. Now, migrants and refugees in general, and especially in a country like Libya, where racism and xenophobia is extremely widespread, where subsequent governments have not been able to actually address this issue and fight it in an adequate manner. They are, because of their gender, so because of a general discrimination against women anyway, and because of the fact that they are, you know, migrants and refugees, they come from very often sub-Saharan Africa, and they're discriminated because of the color of their skin, for example, or their origin. It is much harder for the authorities or for even rights groups or other organizations to actually know the extent of this problem. In the cases that we've documented, the women, you know, that have come to Libya or that transited through Libya, they were all fleeing poverty, conflict, or persecution. They were trying to make a better life for themselves and their families. I can speak to you about some Syrian women that we've spoken to, where because of the international failure to provide more resettlement and solutions, durable solutions for Syrian refugees in general, they were, you know, last year they traveled to Algeria by plane from Turkey because they were the only ones in their families that had passports. Then they traveled only with extended family and friends, so really not anyone that could look out for them. and then they were forced to then cross the desert, the Algerian-Libyan border with Algerian smugglers, placed in an unfinished house, in a partly constructed house, where they were asked for more money and a ransom as well to be able to continue the journey, then walk, in the middle of the night through dangerous terrain in order to then be handed over to other smugglers that then took them to the coast, where then they were able to embark on boats. All that knowing that they are separated from their children, that their babies, they were not able to take their babies, that in some cases, the women basically were breastfeeding up until the moment that they've decided to leave.
Yes,
there are women that do this journey while they are pregnant as well.
Yes.
So
it clearly, what you're describing is horrific. Just when they think they've made it to one place that might be safe, it actually ends up not being. And if we could talk about now the post-migration experience, Ms. Zobnina, I want to bring you in on this, because there are some migration policies that automatically assume women are dependent, right? And they're classified by their relationship to a man. How does that help or hinder women that are making this journey?
Well, it certainly doesn't help the women who are making this journey, specifically those who are vulnerable and are at risk already. So if there is a situation of domestic violence, for example, that may happen, which is not, limited to migrant groups, because we know that women are affected by violence in Europe at a horrific rate. And according to the recent Fundamental Rights Agency report, 1 in 3 women is subjected to sexual violence throughout her lifetime. So when you place a woman who is already vulnerable purely by the status of being born a woman, when you place her in the position of legal dependency on a male spouse, or it can be as well her male or female employer in case of domestic workers, for example, certainly it increases her exposure to various types of violence as well. So in this sense, the dependency, of course, it is a huge problem. And there is massive amount of women who face obstacles starting from the integration into the labor market. They're becoming de-skilled. Women are arriving in Europe with qualifications. They cannot apply them. They can't transfer their skills. They can't get. Can
I get you to talk a little bit more about that? Because in some cases, these are very educated women that are trying to migrate someplace else, yet they lose so much of what they've put into their lives when they make this journey, because it's not recognized someplace else.
Yeah, certainly. This is a big problem. And it is ironic because the European Union, on the one hand, is facing demographic deficit and the deficit in labor market. So there are clear indications that they need more, not only professionals, but various types of group within the labor market. And somehow there are obstacles with regards to the access to labor market that starts from the legal recognition of qualification. But this is just one problem. Another problem would be the actual access to the labor market that has to do with the legal status of women. So even, you see, because the migration policies, there's so much at the discretion of the member states. There might be a body who recognizes the qualification, but effectively she doesn't have the right to work. And even with these recognized qualifications, she's not able to join the labor market and exercise her skills.
And often as well, is it more often that a country will have labor policies that are beneficial to male labor and not female labor? Ms. Chemaly, if you could pick up on that for me.
Yes, that is undoubtedly the case. For example, when a country sets education qualifications, there are just imbalances in education the world round. And so when we see immigrant policies that establish a very high bar, it will disproportionately positively affect men who are more educated, and that has a butterfly effect intergenerationally, right? So if you can't actually create a labor market that has diverse needs, that meets the diverse needs through immigrancy, you end up with these imbalances reproducing themselves. So, for example, in U.S. immigration policy, there was a huge debate last year over exactly this issue, with one contingent really arguing for high-tech laborers who overwhelmingly tend to be men, and another saying, wait a minute, our demographic trends show that what we really need is an influx of people who can provide care labor, and that tends to be women. At the border, the largest percentage of people trying to get in are women with children, almost 80%. And so you can see how the policy is gender imbalanced because we're not taking into consideration those kinds of factors.
Ms. Mughrabi, it's clear with the increasing numbers of migrants we've been seeing trying to make journeys over the past few weeks that clearly we don't seem to have a handle on this situation. Having said that, leaders from the EU did have a meeting last week trying to figure out what to do about this. There was talk of pledging more money, but basically I know Amnesty has said that what has to happen is there has to be alternate forms of transport to Europe. What does Amnesty see as the beginning of trying to solve this?
Well, obviously, an increase of resettlement to European countries or to wealthy countries in order to alleviate the burden from neighboring countries that are neighbors to war-torn places. That would be one thing, and these resettlement places need to increase dramatically. Another thing would be an increase in humanitarian admissions and visas, and of course the strengthening of the asylum system in neighboring countries, for that matter, countries that are neighboring to Libya, which is one of the major places of departure by boat of migrants to Italy and to Europe. But it also, the international community needs to start addressing the human rights abuses and violations that are taking place in Libya as well, including also against refugees and migrants, in order to have a form of accountability for these abuses not to be perpetrated time and time again, and a form of deterrence as well from the crimes taking place.
Ms. Chemaly, what role does the media play in this, in talking about these abuses and shedding light on these abuses? You're a media critic. Put it out there. What role can and should the media play in reporting about this?
So I think the media really needs to be far more aggressive about putting these stories in context, right? So, first of all, sexualized violence historically in the media it's been treated as sort of an aside, something that happens. It's just the price of militarism or the price of being in an unstable situation. Instead, media really has an obligation to think about the central role that sexualized violence and gendered violence plays in the construction of unstable societies. It's not that the sexualized violence is an outcome, although it is, it's definitely a symptom. It's that the idea of sexualized violence, the idea of intimate partner violence, is central to the violence that creates the instability in the first place. And that's not the way media reports on this issue. So if you look at studies done, in particular there's a book that is hugely comprehensive called Sex and World Peace by Valerie Hudson and 3 other scholars that work with her. The research is very consistent, and it's decades old at this point. If we can get a handle culturally in the media on understanding the role that gendered violence plays in the smallest units of society, so in homes, in neighborhoods, in religious communities, we would have a much better understanding of how to tackle these problems, because the kind of violence we're seeing at borders and in smuggling and in trafficking is not outside of society. It's really part of society as it exists, and media tends to isolate it. Media's like, oh, this horrible thing has happened because there's war, and oh, war generates rape. And we really need to invert that equation and think, all right, what is the dynamic before that happens? What are we not talking about? What are we not writing about?
I think that's...
What are we not doing in terms of our policy?
Ms. Chemaly, I think that's a great place to end this discussion, and thank you all so much for your time. Thanks to Magda Mughrabi, Soraya Chemaly, and Anna Zobnina. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us for this edition of Inside Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can get in touch with us on our program page at aljazeera.com. You can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us as well at AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle Carey, and the entire team here, bye for now.